Good afternoon. My name is Sonia Lee. I'm a professor of art history and East Asian languages and cultures at USC. I'm also director of the East Asian Studies Center. So I would like to welcome you all to today's very special event. This is part of our ongoing series on recent publications related to Sinophone studies. Today is extra special because it will feature one of our research associates, Yuanfei Wang, who's been with us since last year, who also share her thoughts on her latest publication. So it'd be really exciting. For those of you in the audience who are new to our event, let me just say a few words about the East Asian Studies Center. It's been part of USC since 1975. It's home to over 120 affiliated faculties across over 40 departments and schools. And we are really blessed to have so many of us who work on cultural issues related to East Asia. In addition to Sinophone studies, we also have another book series on modern Japan, organized by my colleague Ben Uchiyama. So, and we also have many other events, so please stay tuned for announcements from the center for these upcoming events. So for today's, we will have about an hour of discussion between the three panelists. And afterward, we'll have 30 minutes for Q&A. So if you have any questions or thoughts, please use the Q&A box. And now let me turn to our series organizer, Li-Ping Chen. She is the Postdoctoral Scholar and Teaching Fellow in our center at USC. She received her PhD in Comparative Studies in Literature and Culture in 2020, also at USC. Her research interests include cultural identity, literary translingualism, diaspora experience, war memory, and political activism of Taiwanese writers in the Sinophone, East Asia, and also Asian American context. Li-Ping recently published an article on the Taiwanese diaspora writer Guo Feng in Modern Chinese Literature and Culture, and she's currently working on a book manuscript titled Alternative, sort of spelled like alternative, but with a slash in the middle, Taking Roots and Writing Taiwan in Transit. It focuses on the production and identity formation of Taiwanese writers in China, Japan, and the United States, and it promises to be a major contribution to Sinophone studies. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Li-Ping Chen, who will introduce our panelists today.
All right, thank you, Sonia, for the welcome remark and also kind introduction, and also a really big hope for my manuscript. Still working on it. So I also want to thank you and Grace for your great support for the Sinophone series, and also the wonderful EASC staff for making the Zoom format possible. So good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to join us. And this Sinophone study new book series is about, this semester it's about oceanic connection. So in September, we visited Keelung, a port city in Taiwan. And last month, we sailed all the way to the Atlantic. And today, we will encounter pirates, or I should say, writings about pirates. So if you missed any of the talk, or if you want to share the talk with your friends, colleagues, and students, all the event recordings are available in the event webpage. So I will share the link later in the chat box. We are also finalizing another 3 Sinophone book talk for spring 2022. So make sure to come back and check for our spring schedule later. So today we are delighted to have Professor Yuanfei Wang here with us to talk about her new book, Writing Pirates, Vernacular Fiction and Oceans in Late Ming China. This book was published by University of Michigan Press in 2021. And good news, this book is open access. She is visiting scholar here at EASC. Her academic research interests include medieval and early modern globalism and China's literature, Chinese historiography and travelogues of Southeast Asia and Japan, Race and Ethnicity, Pirates and the Sea, Material and Visual Culture, Late Imperial Women's Literature, Translation Studies, Cross-Cultural Exchange in Pre-Modern Times. Our discussant today is Professor Xing Han. He is Associate Professor of History at Brandeis University. His research interests include East Asian World Order, Maritime East Asia, Eurasian Comparative History, Ming-Qing Transition, Overseas Chinese, Chinese Nationalism and Identity. He is the author of Conflict and Commerce in Maritime East Asia, The Zhen Family and the Shaping of the Modern World, 1620 to 1720. And he is also the co-editor of Sea Rovers, Silver and Samurai, Maritime East Asia in Global History, 1550 to 1700. So today's event will begin with the author's presentation and continue with the discussion comment. After that, we will move to the Q&A section. At any point during the talk, feel free to submit your question to the Q&A box. And if possible, please include information about your affiliation. The Q&A box is located in your Zoom control panel. There, you will also find the closed caption function. Please note that the live transcript is automatically generated by Zoom. So that's all I have to say. Without further ado, Professor Wang. Yuanfei, I think you are muted.
Thank you thank you, Li-Ping Chen, for your generous introduction, and I also like to thank Professor Sonia Li for presiding over this panel, and Professor Han Xing for being generously accepting to be my discussant. Also, I'd like to thank USC's East Asian Studies Center for organizing this event. The reason that I wrote this book on pirates is that I have been quite struck by the abundance of pirate stories in America. They show up almost everywhere in American popular culture and very early in an American's reading list. For instance, we all know the classic children's story, Peter Pan, that is about a boy who does not want to grow up and leads Wendy and her brothers to fight against the supervillain Captain Hook in Neverland. We also have numerous movies of pirates, like Pirates of the Caribbean, The Princess Bride, and Treasure Island. Actually, I think most people in America know some anecdotes of some real pirates in history. I have once talked to a local taxi driver, and to my surprise, he told me instantly with excitement about the Blackbeard, where he was executed and what he did, and so on and so forth. So I feel that pirate stories have become kind of a legend or folklore for people who've been living here. On the other hand, pirate stories belong to children's literature or fantasy literature. These stories are about maritime adventures, spirit of freedom, and of course, about the ambiguous boundary between the good and the bad. Although the pirate appears nasty and cruel, he's also chivalric, kind-hearted, and even romantic. So when I tried to find Chinese versions of pirate stories before I wrote the book, I could not find many. One major reason is that is the translation itself. When we directly translate pirate into modern Chinese, 海盗, it does not seem to ring a bell to most of us who are familiar with traditional Chinese literature and culture. Another reason could be that China's coastline is not as long as America's, and therefore pirate stories are much less and therefore much less known in China. However, during my research, I found that words such as Wokou, Haikou, and Haizei are almost omnipresent in Late Ming history and literature published in China's coastal regions, mainly in Zhejiang and Fujian provinces. The concept of the ocean also motivates me to re-examine Chinese literature, and the result has been quite surprising. It's not that the Chinese literature does not talk about oceans. It is just that we have been bound by a certain way of thinking and looking that we forget to take on a refreshed point of view. So during my research, I find two things that are most interesting. The first thing is that unlike the Western term pirate, which has a relatively fixed meaning, the meaning of Wokou, Haikou, or Haizei was extremely fluid in Late Ming China. For example, in the various stories of the pirate king Xu Hai and his lover courtesan Wang Cuiqiao, he is called the minor king of the Ming on the East Sea. And he's also called a traitor, a thief, a bandit in the narrative. But he also acts as a Liangshan Haohan, portrayed as a trustworthy business partner and a loyal lover. And in the Yang Balao story by Feng Menglong, real pirates are Japanese, yet Yang Balao is a Chinese petty merchant who is adopted to become a captive in Japan, and then later he's converted into a Japanese pirate. And in the sequel to The Water Margin, the pirates are Chinese migrants and settlers in Southeast Asia, smugglers, traders, and statesmen. Not to mention the well-known historical pirates such as Lin Daoqian and Liang Daoming, all of whom bear highly ambivalent identities. The signification of Chinese pirates, therefore, it seems to me, is much broader, amorphous, and indeterminate. And this might correspond to their state of being at that time. They are adrift in an ocean of uncertainty and adaptability. In this sense, I think Chinese pirates have much more fluid and complicated meaning than the pirates, what we know, or as we know in the West. And in this book, I tend to consider them as a prototype of Chinese diaspora. A second point I found interesting is that, which is also my book's argument, is that the turbulent oceans of the 16th and 17th centuries brought forth radical insights and perspectives on empire, race, and authenticity for Chinese culture and literature. Through the seafaring activities of merchants and pirates, an early Chinese discourse of the sea came into being. The Late Ming discourse of pirates is comprised of both the imperialistic narratives and public and personal narratives. It links together authorial and imperialistic voices, the voices of marginalized individuals, and cultural fantasies about exotic islands and tropical archipelagos. These three types of different narratives coexist, codepend, compete with, fuse with each other, and contradict with each other. And the discourse of pirates covers fragmented but connected maritime regions, Siam, Java, and Japan, Southeast coastal China, and Vietnam. To give you a sense what I mean here, for instance, in chapter 1, I talk about the novel The Water Margin and its sequel. Normally, probably influenced by modern-day TV drama series in mainland China, our impression of the bandits in The Water Margin is that they come from Mangliang and do not seem to be related to the sea. Yet, my analysis shows that the 16th century text embeds an inland hydraulic network that connects China to the oceans And the bandits are actually smugglers of some very popular international commodities of the time, like mercury, sea salt, and herbal medicine. These pirates navigate around this inland hydraulic network. Some of them are the best swimmers I have ever seen in the entire corpus of Chinese literature. And Zhang Shun is one of them. Here, the living artist Chen Hongshou describes him as born in the Xunyang River and dies in the Qiantang River. There's even a poem dedicated to Zhang Shun in the novel to eulogize, to praise his swimming skills. However, the Song brother bandits could be viewed as a shipboard fraternity against the corrupt land-based imperial authority, since Mangliang, the bandits' base, is full of waterways, and they have thousands of warboats sailing on the lakes. Yet the novel, or precisely I argue in the book, the romance, contains these bandits with sentiments of loyalism, empire, and cultural belonging. Although they are able to navigate on the rivers, which link the veins of the Chinese empire, they are not able to sail beyond the seas. In fact, their biggest failure is that they shipwreck at the estuary of the Qiantang River after the surrender to the corrupt Song court. Of course, they have a very tragic ending, but the kind of narrative represented in the water margin channels both the voice of the empire and the voice of marginalized individuals. The water margin sequel, on the other hand, has a much brighter outlook of an empire. It successfully constructs a multi-ethnic, military and commercial maritime kingdom and a haven for outlaws and refugees. This utopia, I argue in the book, is not just made out of an idea or a fiction, as some scholars have argued, or as a metaphor for Taiwan, but is also based upon the historical Ayutthaya Empire in Siam, the global maritime trade, transnational migration, and the wars in East Asia, especially Hideyoshi's invasion of Korea and Manchu's conquest of China. And last but not the least, its imperialistic voice comes from early Han Chinese racism. Before China's encounter with the West and the advent of Western colonization in Southeast Asia. In terms of Han Chinese racism, for example, the pirate leaders formed alliance marriages among themselves to secure both their Chinese identity and political power in Siam. Li Jun marries the daughter of Chancellor Wen for her inheritance of Confucian ritual and ethic ideals from her father. Li Jun proposes his sworn brother Hua Fengchun to engage in an alliance marriage with the Siamese princess. But the Siamese princess herself is actually also a Chinese. So the Siamese queen hails from the eastern capital of China. The king descends from the legendary Han General Ma Yuan. So the king also has a Chinese bloodline. But the Siamese princess dresses as a Chinese. She is virtuous and liberal, skilled at Chinese literature and calligraphy, learning from her mother. She speaks fluent Mandarin without any barbarian accent. On the other hand, they also encourage marriage between lesser Chinese officials and the daughters of local Siamese families. Such kind of narrative reveals fears of misgeneration among diasporic Chinese and assumes a hierarchy of different bloodlines. The overseas Chinese elites must maintain pure Chinese blood to secure their rulership in the foreign region. Further, the Siamese villain Sun Dragon symbolizes the Chinese perception of Southeast Asians and South Asians as overly sexual and lustful. Since the novel was written during the Ming-Qing transition, and the sequel is among a few other literature, such as The Peony Pavilion and the Jinping Meicihua, that imagine the southwestern subtropical region of China, Southeast Asia, and South Asia as a locus of eroticism. This region in return contributed to the heated fascination with love and passion in Li-Ming culture. So again, here imperialist voices blend with voices of marginal figures and cultural fantasies of tropical regions. In chapter 2, I discuss Li-Ming narratives of Javanese peoples and Yuanming Javanese diplomatic history in 3 unofficial histories and 1 vernacular novel. As we can see here, the first 2 authors, they were demoted before they published their unofficial histories. And the last 2 authors, they do not have Jingshi degrees, neither do they have any official title. Yet they all started to compose China's diplomatic history with her neighbors at around the same time. And instead of writing history, Luo Maodong wrote a novel. All these writings coincided with the curious appearance of a vernacular idiom involving Java in The Water Margin and sister novel Plum in the Golden Vase. The idiom says his anger had drilled straight into the country of Java and his facial expression transformed into a smile. Here the narrator describes the merchant Ximeng Qing's reaction as he's first struck by Pan Jingyan's curtain pole and then enchanted by her striking beauty. But there is a pun in this idiom. Zhawa is written as Zhawa. So the first wa with mouth radical is replaced by the wa with water radical. So there is an ambiguous idea of Java in this idiom, whether it is construed as a foreign land or as an ordinary puddle nearby. When Wokou raided coastal China and Hideyoshi invaded and ravaged Korea, all these authors looked to China's history for an illuminating counterpoint to their troubled present. Java has held an important geopolitical position in the Indian Ocean during the zenith of Ming maritime exploration, and Zheng He had visited repeatedly on his voyages sponsored by the Yongle Emperor. Sino-Java relations was thus their point of comparison. 3 incidents in the history of Sino-Java relations proved memorable and hence became the content of narration. Each of these incidents was noteworthy because it involved an act of transgression by Javanese individuals or by Chinese pirates against the Chinese official tributary order, followed by an unexpected response by a Chinese emperor. Yet, writing in a time when the Ming imperial order was under assault, the 3 historians and 1 novelist construct narratives on Ming-Java relations to reflect their own multivalent visions of the Ming Empire. Tapping into the emperor's authority, their words, and their imperial Jaisio, the authors rearrange sequences of events and reconstruct narratives. While all 3 historians show a tendency to moralize Ming China's tributary economy and positional authority, they also show emotions and subjectivity in history writing. As for the novel Sanbao Taijian, which delineates that the Yongle Emperor dispatches Zheng He to seek the imperial Jaisio in the South Sea, and eventually they reach Mecca. It elucidates the absence of a coherent imperial identity in Li-Ming China and the irreconcilable nature of some Li-Ming literatized self-conflicting ideologies. Imperialism and racism coexist with the intention to maintain the tributary war order through the policy of cherishing men from afar. Part 2 focuses on the Late Ming discourse of Japan and Japanese pirates. Chapter 3 considers the compilation of military geographical treaties, Japanese Chinese glossaries, and the translation and transcription of waka as significant practices of the discourse of Japan. Such discursive practices constituted an early phase of the 18th century Neo-Confucian tradition of philology, phonology, and evidential scholarship, and continued the long history of Chinese translation of foreign languages. Importantly, these discursive practices also incorporate the significant dimension of dialects and vernacular speech. So here is an example of how the three travelogue compilers hired by the government try to make sense of this Japanese waka poetry by transcribing and translating it into Chinese. And inevitably in their transcription, they could not transcribe it into early modern Mandarin because such thing is very hard to emulate the sound through Chinese characters. So actually what the transcription is based upon their dialects. Without being pronounced as in a certain Wu dialect, the transcription will not be accurately representing the waka poem itself. Another example is this, the Song of Proper Pronunciation. It's another example of how the travelogue compilers try to learn Japanese hiragana and language by working on Chinese phonetic orthography. This shows their awareness of the huge differences of accents in China, and they wanted to come to terms with a certain standard so that people from different places could be able to learn Japanese language without being misguided by the transcription itself. Part 3 considers historical and fictional narratives of the pirate kings Wang Zhi and Xu Hai. Particularly in chapter 6, I discuss the emergence of the public sphere from the 1620s to the 1640s in Jiangnan's booming commercial publication industry. This chapter examines a few Huaben vernacular stories and novels. They are Zhou Qingyuan's Quelling Pirates, Lu Yunlong's Model Words, and its pirated editions, Illusions and Thorough Amazement, and Xing Hang's scholar beauty novel, The Romance of Jing Yun and Chao, published in the 1640s, which was later transmitted to Vietnam and adapted into the Vietnamese epic, The Tale of Quill. These authors instill their political opinions and literary values into their revisions and pirating editions of the Wang Cuijiao and Xu Hai romance, continuing and revising the tradition of the Tang Chuanqi romances such as the romances of Hu Xiaoyu and Cui Yinyin. The various versions of Wang Cuijiao, Xu Hai romance show a deepened tension between loyalism and personal feelings. The result is the central notion of authenticity. The basic story of this romance goes like this. The courtesan managed to persuade the pirate to submit to China, but he is deceived by the government, besieged and captured. He eventually dies after his submission. Torn between her loyalty to China and her love for the pirate king, the courtesan commits suicide by jumping into the Qiantang River in Hangzhou. Wang Cuijiao thus demonstrates her virtues of patriotic loyalism, female chastity, and romantic love on all three fronts, which were highly valued in Late Ming culture. Different versions of the story all subject the female body as the site of reconciliating the tension between loyalty and feeling, interiority and exteriority, and the concept of authenticity. Zhou Qingyuan's version speaks of a common concern for fair judgment. Lu Renlong's version shows that the author cum narrator's loyalism to the Ming state and the advocacy of female fidelity authorized his publication enterprise. The anonymous authors of Sir Amazement and Illusions both advocate for the truth of Confucian morality to legitimize their publications of vernacular fiction at the end of the Ming Dynasty, which was in a great turmoil. Qingxing Cairen's, which is also an anonymous author, discusses a renewed notion of the authentic self. Particularly the last novel marks a paradigmatic shift from the public to the private and the literary, not through resolving the contending viewpoints of the Xu Wang Chao romance, the conflict between public duty and personal feelings, but through diverting their attention to the scholar beauty narrative, hence repressing the dilemma, keeping the old problems at bay. The last but not the least point I find very interesting is the double voices in all the author in all the writings published by these authors. I would like to highlight that all these authors are kind of marginalized individuals of the Ming Empire. They were either demoted or persecuted by some corrupt officials, or they never got any degrees, and they worked as local teacher, as publishers, as fiction writers, as tutors, or as yeah, you name it. So that is all. I think I'm going to end here for now. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Yuanfei, for this great overview of your book and also showing us this amazing images and also the close reading of some of the passages. So before I pass it on to Professor Han Xing, our audience, feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A box. The function is located in the Zoom control panel. All right. So without further ado, Professor Han.
Okay. Hello, everyone. And thank you so much, Li-Ping, for inviting me to serve as the discussant. And it was a pleasure, Yuanfei, to hear your talk and also read your book. And doing both, I just want to share with you some of my thoughts and questions. This kind of my response to your book as well as your talk. And on the whole, we really like the organizational layout of the book. I think it really combines literature as well as history, and I'm speaking as a historian. And the entire book, I think, contains a lot of depth in the sense that it looks at a very wide section of Chinese society during the Ming Dynasty, and kind of, a kind of 3D representation of the Ming Empire as a whole, and laying it out for the reader. And I also think it's very spatially, very well spatially organized, in which it cuts across the boundaries or the traditionally accepted boundaries of imperial China, and goes out into the sea and looks at how imperial China interacts with the broader maritime world. And so I'm kind of left with looking at several points, several comments, along with questions. So I think on the one hand, this book provides space for marginal voices, pirates, as well as other groups, other members of society who are in the margins. And I think it's kind of tricky because, these marginal voices cannot speak on their own. Many of the narratives that we read are being written by elite. But this is still very interesting because many of the elites who write these narratives are themselves relatively lower ranking. And as you mentioned, I think in the very last part of your talk, a lot of them either didn't pass the civil service examinations or, did not obtain any government office. And so they write these works and maybe finding a kind of common cause. I think the best known example is Li-Ping, right? Who really shows a lot of sympathy with bandits and pirates. And it seems that a lot of the romanticism emanates from that particular group of the lower elites. And, reading this kind of analysis of class, I'm kind of reminded, in my own research. So European observers during the 17th and 18th century, so this is during the Qing, this is a period of time that's later than yours. But, they go to the China coast, they go to parts of Southeast Asia with Chinese communities, and they observe that, there was a broad variety of geographic knowledge, very good geographic knowledge of different ports, of directions, and even of the world outside of Southeast Asia among Chinese mariners. And in fact, there's one surviving work from the middle of the Qing by Xing Hang, and he's actually a Chinese residing in Macau who reported his observations about the vast world to a member of the elite who happened to record it down. There seems to be a disjuncture. There's a wide variety of knowledge among Chinese communities, especially coastal communities. But at uppermost elite levels, kind of discourse, right? That kind of knowledge does not seem to penetrate. And I think that's something that we could kind of talk about in the discussion. I don't have any specific questions, but this is just an observation. And this leads me to the related point that, we see that there is a state structure, right? We have the imperial court, we have the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy is very thinly stretched, especially when we get to the grassroots level. And I think at the grassroots level, the official vertical structure intersects with a horizontal kind of network that spills out across boundaries, right? It goes into the maritime world. It extends into ports, across East and Southeast Asia. Melissa Macaulay wrote a very recent book that came out that kind of speaks about, it examines the Chao community and to speak of a greater Chao that expands into maritime East Asia, especially Southeast Asia. So, and Yuanfei, you mentioned the word Jianghu, right? In your book, it seems to kind of characterize these groups very well. They have a very loose association with each other. They have a network, and so the challenge for the state, right, is immediately obvious. Do you keep them confined within China, or do you somehow expand your state boundaries to kind of incorporate them? And I definitely think that the Ming was dealing with this particular dilemma. And I'm really struck by what you said about, the prototype of the Chinese diaspora being precisely these pirates as well as smugglers. And in many ways, the definition of pirates and smugglers come from the Ming state, because they have their key bans, they have their prohibition. If you really want to engage in private trade. What are you going to do, right? Other than violating the laws and regulations imposed by the state. And so, if you're putting everything together, right, the kind of vertical state structure, the horizontal network, we also see somehow everything put together, a kind of total nationalism, or even an imagination of the Chinese empire as a natural form of government. And this is really interesting because even the smugglers, even the pirates who violate the law, completely flout imperial prerogatives. They might not even like King China, right? In the end, right? At the conclusion to many of your tales that you bring up, kind of submit to the Chinese imperial order. And so, this kind of imagined community of the Chinese empire. And so my question, in response would be, how might this imperial form, well, what is this imperial form, satisfy all of the different groups, the complex social makeup that you describe in your book, right? So what would really be the meaning of, say, loyalty or morality and authenticity, right? And I mean, if we think about authenticity as an imperial form, right? And in some ways, we're trying to understand how people beneath the elite level conceive of empire and their identification with it. A lot of works have actually spoken about, elite conceptions of community, elite belonging to a larger cultural world or an imperial zone. But people beneath the elite level, right? I think that's really interesting because one thing that I was struck, in reading your book, Yuanfei, is that you speak of the vernacular and dialect as somehow equally foreign as Japanese, compared to the official Huanhua or the official speech. And so it's kind of interesting, right? And then also, the attitude towards people who had gone abroad or associated with the Japanese or the Siamese or the Javanese. So I guess my question here is, if we're conceiving of a larger imperial community, right, a common imperial space, then what does it mean to be a traitor, right? How do you betray the empire? Would associating with the Japanese or the Javanese, would that be betraying the empire, right? So kind of explaining collaboration. And I think on a related note, where might this loyalty to the empire stand in regard to, say, dynastic loyalty, right? Loyalty to a particular imperial house. And I'm pointing, precisely to the transition between the Ming and Qing, right? So, how might this dynastic transition, for instance, affect identity in many ways? So, and I guess my final point, relates to Chinese imperialism. You bring this up quite a bit in your book, and to be honest, I'm still trying to put a finger on it. I've read many books about Chinese imperialism, Qing imperialism, right? So I'm still kind of wondering what it is. I mean, it does involve the Zhenhe voyage. That definitely forms a part of the historical memory. Zhenhe is applied in so many cases. Reading Tonio Andrade's book, Lost Colony, he actually speaks about a Ming description of the Dutch as, why did they have such sturdy ships and weapons? Well, Zhenhe went there and they stole it from Zhenhe, right? So, the Zhenhe is definitely part of that kind of Chinese maritime expansionist narrative. But as we know, right, and as Melissa McCauley mentions in her latest work, a lot of this expansion of Chinese kind of after the 16th century involves less of a state-sponsored expansion and more of what she calls territoriality, right? So kind of, networks or groups of Chinese going abroad, using territory for economic exploitation, and to settle down, largely with the kind of benign neglect or even outright hostility of the group. Yeah, I just want to hear what your input is in regards to kind of Chinese imperialism, because I mean, we also definitely see a lot of things that are related to what we might associate with a classical imperialist mindset, right? So, in other words, you know, the cultural transformation of the barbarian people, right? The kind of exoticism of the other, sexualization of women, right, in these places, and I think what's really distinct is not just Sensa. Yuanfei, you also mentioned Ma Yuan, right? Ma Yuan is not only, you know, pointed out as an ancestor of the Siamese princess or the queen that you mentioned. You know, he also makes a very big imprint on Vietnam, right? Because, you know, he's seen as the person who brought civilization there, and there's still many temples to Ma Yuan in Vietnam, especially among the Chinese community there. So yeah, that's kind of what I have to say. You know, maybe some things we could talk about, or if you could answer any questions.
Thank you, Professor Han, for this very insightful comments, and especially this oceanic network and how that is mediated and also complicated by these marginal voices, whereas some of them are subversive forces to the state. But on the other hand, they seem to be sort of follow or reveal some proximity to the, for example, the so-called loyalty or the following of the Chinese imperial orders. So, and now I will invite Yuanfei to respond to the any points or comments and questions raised by Professor Han.
Yeah, thank you, Han, for your very interesting comments. Yeah, for Chinese imperialism, I think it's like all forms of imperialism. I think Edward Said said imperialism is a kind of narrative, a discourse. So it's everywhere. It's in the schools. It's in literature. It's it's in all kinds of institutions. So yeah, I think it's everywhere. But what I found interesting during my search while I was writing this book, imperialism does not come purely as imperialism. For example, the Japanese travelogues are compiled by the compilers hired by the government, Hou Jigao, Zheng Shengong. They were spies. They used to be spies in Japan, and then they started to collect information and intelligence about Japan. But even I think this, I consider their travelogues as a kind of imperialistic writing, right? Because it has a certain perspective and purpose. But even for that kind of writing, inevitably there are personal voices coming in. Because, for example, they inevitably have to use their dialects and to transcribe Japanese language. So yeah, so I think imperialist voices and personal voices always are blended together in the text I studied. Yeah, I think that's something I find interesting. I also really like your point about Jianghu, the horizontal network outside the state. I think that's precisely why the pirates they were so multivalent and so indeterminate in terms of their images and identities. It's almost impossible to really pin down who they are. Even for Wang Zhi, we have checked like more than 10 narratives, historiographies about Wang Zhi. Every narrative says different things about him. And for the statue of Wang Zhi, the statue of Wang Zhi in Nagasaki, he is represented as almost like a Confucian man. He doesn't look like a pirate at all. So I think probably the very being of the pirates being as being very elusive and evasive and indeterminate, amorphous in their identities, maybe it's a way for them to be able to form horizontal network outside the territory bound states and nations. Also, yeah, I think they are definitely very adventurous. They seek freedom. Yeah, they cannot be pinned down at all.
Yeah, the statue of Wang Zhi is indeed very, very interesting. And yeah, as a matter of fact, Japanese narratives actually they actually portray him as a Confucian gentleman, someone who's a very respected member of society. And so, and I think there were narratives by Chinese observers who went there, and just the impression that they got was that he does not seem to be the leader of a multinational smuggling ring. He definitely, he walked into a study. He's got the typical setup of a Confucian scholar, brush, inkstone, book, all kinds of things. So yeah, it's just that kind of elusive nature. They're not always on board their ships. They're not always looting and killing and plundering.
Yeah, and they also, like Liang Chao has pointed out, and your study shown that the pirates later in Southeast Asia, like Zheng Zhao, is he a pirate? And then he became a king in Thailand too. So
yeah, well, with Xing Hang, it's I don't think he himself was a pirate, but he definitely had support from Haudo merchant pirates who were very active in the Gulf of Siam. And I guess also, maybe another example, in addition to Xing Hang and Wang Zhi, is it's Pakunda, right? It's Xing Hang, and he is incredibly elusive if we think about it. He's elusive to the point that nationalist historiography in Taiwan, right, in the PRC, in Japan, they could all somehow mold Xing Hang into some kind of national or East Asian hero, right? Someone who was loyal, someone who was steadfast to his beliefs. So, many of these narratives also conveniently overlook the fact that the gun plundered, looted, killed, burned extensively, right? And and actually many Ming loyalists who eventually ended up in Southeast Asia, that's what really struck by your point that the pirates being a kind of prototype of Chinese diaspora. Many of the last Ming loyalists who fled abroad were actually pirates.
Yeah, so it's very interesting to see that the definition of pirates really depends on who defines who as pirate, who says who. It's a label, right? A label by whom. So, but it looks like I think, but I think Late Ming time is a very, very interesting time when, I don't know, but at least Li Zhi is proud that he's a proud pirate. Everybody is proud of being a pirate, I guess. Yeah, because otherwise there's no this our Lord, the Liangshan Haohan, they are bandits, but yeah, they are great heroes. So it's a very interesting time here.
Yeah, and then I mean pirates, right? The figure of the pirates, the story, and then legend, and then sometimes it's a myth. But also there's this kind of layer of imagination to project the fantasy and to project in the imagination about their adventure. And in a way that, as Yuanfei mentioned, it's multiply, right? So by oral tradition, they telling story, telling about their experiences to another person, to another community, and then their quote unquote the heroic achievements seem to be bigger and bigger. But I think it's interesting to think about, as Yuanfei pointed out, the diaspora. They're this very interesting network, this trans-regional network, and in a way that how they interact locally, but also trans-regionally, and then how that, with this mobility and then with the capitals, that is both financial capital, but at the same time, it's also cultural capital that these pirate figure that they have, and then occur through this circuit of, I guess, moving and mobility as well. All right, so let me double check the time. And so now we will be moving on to the Q&A section. And we already have some questions here. And then so audience, feel free to drop the question in the Q&A box. And then Professor Han, also feel free to jump in and then add and share your thoughts. All right. Okay. So Yuanfei, so the first question is from Diana Yan from the Bard Graduate Center from NYC. So let me read the question. Hi, Professor Wang. Thanks for your wonderful talk and congratulations on your new publication. I was wondering, how did the Han Chinese racism apply to the Japanese? How did Ming era Hokkien merchants view their Japanese collaborators and competitors while conducting clandestine maritime trade in Kyushu and South China Sea?
Thank you, Diana, for the question. Yeah, I think in one of my chapters, I talk about race and ethnicity in Feng Menglong's story about a Chinese captive turned pirate. In that case, the merchant, he's originally from Shanxi, Xi'an, a Chinese, but after he is acculturated in Japan, he sort of becomes a Japanese Chinese. He learned how to speak Japanese. He learns Japanese way of dressing, and so on and so forth. He learns how to be a pirate, like how to practice swords. Later on, after he returns to China, nobody from his family is able to recognize him. Yeah, so that means through his linguistic and cultural training, he sort of there is sort of physical transformation as well. So he appears as completely foreign to his family members. That's a story, and another examples are paintings, Chinese paintings of Japanese pirates. They are very famous, Kang Wo Tujuan and Wokou Tujuan, and both of these paintings tend to rigidly portray Japanese, portray pirates as Japanese, and these Japanese, some of them have very heavy body hair. They are probably Ainu people. Some of them everybody wears Japanese fabric clothes. Yeah, so the physical portrayal of the pirates really rigidly associate pirates with Japanese people. About Ming era Hokkien merchants' view of their Japanese collaborators and competitors. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. And unfortunately, because I think one of this, what I find lacking in my research is precisely how those Fukienese merchants and smugglers view the world around them. I could not find the sources like that. So all the sources I can find are published, either they are published and widely circulated official accounts or unofficial histories or vernacular fiction. So yeah, I would definitely love to dig into more about local archives of about Japanese pirates and also Fukienese merchants, also texts written by these people. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Yuanfei. And then next question. So next question is from Maria Grazia Petrucci. And so let me read the question first. I found interesting this presentation. Thank you, Professor Wang. And you explained here that imperialism was joined by racism to continue to maintain the tributary relations. But there were cases in which even the diplomatic relations were not acknowledged and taken as piratical enterprises, in particular for what regard the Ryukyu Kingdom. So I wonder if the literature on such topic does also reveal Imperial Ming Chinese government mishaps in dealing with such tributary relations by those authors that were demoted. Thank you.
The Ryukyu Kingdom, yeah. So the question is particularly about Ryukyu Kingdom's tributary relations with China, right? For Ryukyu Kingdom, one example I know is a diplomat, Ming Dynasty diplomat. He traveled to Ryukyu, and there he observed that Ryukyu people had their own writings and scripts. So he was very curious in learning their language, and then he even I think he advocated that traveling and empiricism or seeing really can make a difference to one's knowledge. That's something. So I think yes, and this person also composed many poems on Ryukyu, but maybe I could. But this person, he's not. He's a diplomat ambassador, so he's not really demoted. Yeah, I could send you his name and his compositions if you like to know more about this.
Great, thank you, Yuanfei. And then especially this network on the sea, right? Not just pirates, but also this kind of tributary system and also circulation of goods, trading as well. So let's see. So we have another question. So this question is from Professor Brian Bernard. Hi, Brian. So let me read the question first. Thank you, Professor Wang and Professor Han, for this rich and insightful discussion. Yuanfei, I have been reading your book with great interest. I like how you broaden the scope of vernacular fiction to include genres like unofficial histories and glossaries. And I also like how you study considers the various significance of pirates. I was wondering if you have also considered another signification of pirate as a verb, that is, to pirate. With respect to the production of vernacular fiction about pirates by authors writing from marginal positions. With Chen Chen's sequel to Water Margin, the author pirates a popular masterwork of Chinese fiction to write a sequel unauthorized by the original authors, almost as if Chen Chen is pirating another author's identity. Since many of the authors you discuss weren't themselves pirates of the maritime type they were writing about, I was wondering if you could say more about the ways their biographies or their writing act might be considered as a type of literary piracy.
Thank you, Brian, for this great question. Yes, I think like Dao Ban, Hai Dao, they both share the word Dao, to steal. So yes, that's why there's a sequel. the sequel to the Water Margin, still paying tribute to the parent work. Yes, and in the last chapter about the Xu Hai Wang Cui Jiao romance, they are quite one of my argument was that it's precisely through literacy piracy that we have literary innovation, because the Xing Yan was pirated at least 2 times into Illusions and Third Amazement, and the story was completely copy pasted, with only the title changed to a shorter title. That's all. So yes, pirating was definitely very rampant. Literate pirating was definitely very rampant in Late Ming publishing industry. The point, I think most scholars argue that there's no copyright. There's no such concept of copyright in Imperial China, but still some people still try to avoid sensitive issues by deleting, for example, the cover of the book, or deleting or changing the titles of each stories, for example, to make it more like a not directly stolen from somebody else. And it also is related to authorship. If we think about Chen Chen's pirating act, I wouldn't say Chen Chen is really pirating, because he's actually writing a sequel. Like he is giving a second life to the characters, heroes in the Water Margin. So it's not really pirating. And I would argue that Chen Chen established more an authorship than Shi Nai'an, because Shi Nai'an, he is really an anonymous author. We don't know who he is. But Chen Chen, he is a Ming loyalist. He gives a lot of voices to his characters as overseas Chinese who can establish themselves in the kingdom of Thailand, in Siam. So, and I would say he is not really copying the author's identity, even though I would agree that they both share a certain ideal of the Chinese empire, that is the Confucianism, culturalism, the certain rituals, and also this kind of Han Chinese lineage ideal. So yes, about other authors, I would say Luo Maodeng is also parroting a lot. He's yeah, all those they kind of parrot the fiction writers. They parroted a lot sources from history, so historical texts. Yeah, so there's definitely a big mess there.
Yeah, thank you, Yuanfei. And especially to think about this, kind of unpack this very interesting kind of correlated dynamics like piracy, and pirating, the act of pirating, and then thinking about all this literary work, right? They are sort of paying homage, paying tribute to the previous literary production. So thank you, Yuanfei. And then Professor Han, feel free to jump in and then share your thoughts with us. And let's see, we have one short question about actually about imperialism. So I believe you answer this question, I guess, in relation to Professor Han's comment, but let's see. This question is submitted by anonymous attendees. Can one call it imperialism if it is only Chinese chivalristic attitude without actual occupation and colonization by the force? So I guess this is about how you use the word imperialism and what Chinese imperialism imply, and then also entail in your framework of analysis.
Yes, yeah, I think that's a great question. Yes, in the book I did clarify that the Ming Empire did not occupy or colonize Thailand or Java or Japan. Imperialism here is a kind of fantasy or a narrative.
Yeah, yeah. I guess I also want to respond to this because, well, yeah, it's a very slippery word. Together with colonization or colony, right? I mean, I guess my sense is that there isn't any colonization or invasion in the sense of a modern nation state, but you could construe the Ming tributary order as an attempt to create a larger imperial space beyond China's boundaries. And I think the Ming, more than any dynasty before it, really tried to make China's centrality a reality rather than just rhetoric, because the Ming were the ones who did the tribute trade system. So it's not just about recognition of China's centrality. I think it's also an attempt to monopolize the kind of trade flows that take place within the Sinosphere, right? And you could think about Zhenghe's missions in that kind of light. And of course, the Zhenghe missions were disbanded, but actually the whole tributary system worked up until the 16th century. There was one person, I think Maria, who asked about Ryukyu, right? I mean, Ryukyu played a very central role in the Ming tributary system, kind of, as an intermediary state, tying Japan to Southeast Asia to Malacca, and Malacca too, for that matter. I mean, they were able to serve as nodes within the larger tributary system and do a lot of the things for the Ming that the Ming was not able to do directly after the Zhenghe mission was discontinued. Just some random thoughts here.
Right, but thank you, Professor Han. And then, so especially this word imperialism, which is, I guess, have many different faces, and it depends on the historical context, and also the different enterprises and ideology involved in that practice. But I guess one of the things definitely important in this structure is power relation. And as Professor Han mentioned, that in the Sinosphere, and especially in the system or tributary, this kind of centrality, the Sino-centered regional, or even as the Chinese, they themselves imagine the China-centered world order at that time. So now we're talking about the power relation or the structure of power relation. So there are questions submitted early through the registration process. And so let me see. And then thinking about, we talk about power, we think about, the state, and then we think about, the different dominances. But another thing, the question is about gender issue as well. So there's one question submitted by audience earlier is about female pirates. So let me read the question first. Are there many female pirates in these vernacular stories? And if so, how are they portrayed?
As far as I know, I only know one female pirate, Zheng Yisao, but I have not studied her. Hang Xing, have you studied her? Zheng Yisao.
Not beyond the kind of standard narrative. I mean, so she was she's actually very much related to the history of Hong Kong, because that was actually, the peak in Central. That was actually one of the places where she and her pirates made their hideout, as well as a lot of the offshore islands like Lantau, where the Hong Kong airport is. But yeah, anyways, she led an entire squadron, and she seemed to defy all of the notions of, patriarchy on land, the Confucian order. But what's really interesting, and actually her story kind of conforms to yours, Yuanfei, even though it occurs in the 18th century. So she ends up picking her husband gets killed, and she ends up picking her husband from among the crew, who is Zhang Bao, right? Zhang Bao Cat. And the husband and wife, led the pirates. But what I think was very interesting is that, even though she was very powerful, that she commanded the squadron, she still did so through her husband, Zhang Bao. Well, first Bin Yi and then Zhang Bao. And then in the end, she surrendered to the Qing dynasty. And he gets, and then she gets, arranged, she has their own land and everything. And I guess in the very end, despite all of their defiance against the Chinese imperial order, they end up conforming in this really strange marginal way, right, to the Chinese order itself.
Yeah, and then for our audience, if you're interested, definitely Google the female pirates, and then there's I believe, some fascinating stories about her, and also some accounts as well. So our next question is about those writers, and then whether they have experience, for the seafaring experience. So let me read the question. Did any of these Ming period authors have personal experience with boating or seafaring, or even personal encounter with pirates themselves?
One of these authors, yeah.
Are they writing based on their personal encounter, or this is writing based on what they hear or what they, to some degree, imagined?
My first answer is no, because those historians and novelists, they write histories and fiction based upon archives, not based upon like empirical encounters with pirates. But but they also, they also write down their hearsays. They write down other people's experiences and encounters. So I would say it's a hodgepodge of everything. But yeah, I would say most of them are armchair anthropologists or armchair travelers who write about overseas adventures through reading histories and reading archives. Yeah, I also wish I could have more first-hand materials in first-hand materials about overseas encounters. Of course, there are like Haiyu and a lot of manuscripts in Southeast Asia, for example. So maybe Hangxing can tell us more about those archives.
Well, I mean, in terms of any of the writers encountering the pirates, I actually not really that sure, but actually, pirates themselves have written poems. So, this kind of imperfect, once again, this kind of imperfect aping of the Chinese elite system or the Chinese elite order. And yeah, some of the pirates have actually written poems. I don't know, about landscapes, about the sea, and they're known as maritime poems. And I haven't looked at any of them in detail, but there is a scholar at the Academia Sinica in Taiwan, and his name is Liao Feng. I think he does a lot of Chinese literature, and he specializes. I think he specializes in pirate poetry. So maybe she's someone whom I really want, but yeah, maybe I could hook you up with him, Yuanfei, if you want to.
Oh, yeah, I'll be grateful. Yeah, I'm thinking about the Zelda Map. I wonder if that kind of map was made by I think that was made by a merchant, right? But that
Yeah,
was
Zelda
definitely
Map is
non-official, very
yeah, and related to the Zelda Map too are these compass needles. I think Robert Baxter has also studied those. And they mostly come from private sources, mariners compiling them. Yeah, and they might have been pirates themselves. But what's very interesting is that, I think even the Zelda Map and the compass needle routes, they're preserved and recorded down by literate elites. So I think we still have to go through them in some way.
Yeah, thank you both. And then, so it's amazing to sort of see that how, these writers are chair-bound, like land-based, but their imagination, like fly high and then even travel on the sea. And then with all this archival materials, and then tell the story and also the history of the pirates. So now, let's see. So with that note, this is awesome. And what a great way to conclude the series for this semester. I want to thank Professor Wang for sharing your work with us and Professor Han for offering insightful comments. I really enjoyed the conversation today. And thank you, our audience, for joining us today from different parts of the world and the questions and feedback you share with us. So make sure you check out our website for upcoming events in the Sinophone series and other talks hosted by EASC. And stay safe. I hope to see you next year in our next events. So now I will pass the time to Sonia.
Well, thank you so much to Professor Yuanfei Wang for this really fascinating discussion about pirates. I learned so much from both you and also Professor Xing Han. And I also like to thank Li-Ping for organizing the series and making very good selection of books for our series. And last but not least, I'd like to thank the audience for staying with us for an hour and a half today. And I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. And please stay tuned for an announcement from our center. Until then, good evening.
For the questions we don't have time to cover, I will send it to Yuanfei. Right, so take care. See you guys.
Yeah.